A very warm welcome and thank you for joining us here in the Knowledge Zone. We now have a dinghy show favourite, Michael McNamara, sharing his top tips on how to rig your boat in different conditions. I caught up earlier with Michael as he talked me through all of the essential things to remember before going afloat.
Hello there, I'm Michael McNamara, and as you can see from the background, I'm in my little sail loft. Flip Foals is making a wayfarer sail in the background. And what we're going to do over the next short while is we're going to talk about the way that we as sailors can get our boat round the racetrack as quickly as possible. So they reckon about 80% of our time should be spent when we're beating, 80% of our time should be spent looking ahead, getting ready for what's about to come, which frankly only leaves a miserable 20%, which surely can't be enough to make sure that we're going as quickly as possible. So how do we do it? There's no mucking about. When we're in this looking with our heads inside the boat, we have to answer two questions, ask two questions and get the answer to two questions. One is, are the sails delivering the maximum amount of squirt that they're capable of? Or as is more usual the case, tell me sails what you're doing wrong so that I can sort it out. And this boat shows all the things we need to do beautifully. Notice how the boat's upright, so equal washes from the right-hand side and the left-hand side, making minimum amount of resistance through the water. Because this is so important, because we do not want to heel, we want the boat to be going through the water as the designer intended. So how do we know whether the boat is upright? It's actually dead easy. It's really very straightforward. All we need to do as helmsmen is just release our grip on the tiller. If the tiller stays down the center line, then we've got an equal wash going from side to side. If the tiller moves one way or the other, then the boat is making more resistance than it should be. What it means, for example, if the tiller moves to leeward, the boat is heeling to leeward, because the tiller will always go to the problem area. If the boat's heeling, you're creating an asymmetric wash, a wash that's pushing the bow into the wind, and so you're probably going to have to steer in order for the boat to go a straight line. If you have to pull the tiller to windward in order to keep the boat on a straight line, you are going to go slower than you should be. If we move the tiller 3 inches, which is nothing, just 3 inches from the straight line, we're creating the same sort of drag as we would be as if we bunged our arm in the water. Well, clearly, it's a good way of cooling the lager, but it's a dead slow way of getting the boat through the water. So, how do we check that it's upright? 30, 40, 50,000 times a leg. Just release, we don't have to do it that often. Just release our grip on the tiller to see whether the boat is dead upright. And if it's not, if it's heeling to leeward, helms have to sit out, well, crews will already be out there. And if that doesn't work, then the mainsail has got to be eased. Remember the rule. The earlier you ease the main in order to reduce the curve the air is going to have to go round, the less you will actually have to reduce, the less you will actually have to ease it. So ease a little bit early rather than a hell of a lot later. I mean, the other thing that this photograph shows is the wash. Because not only do we have to monitor whether we're upright or not, but one of the other things, the second main thing we have to do is check how well we're actually going through the water. And we do that by looking at the wash. Think about a flat out plane, a really good flat out plane. The wash behind the boat is billiard table smooth. And in fact, 20, 30, 40 meters behind the boat, there's a sort of rooster tail where the side washes meet. As far as the water's concerned, that's a 30, 40, 50 meter long boat. So no wonder it's going fast. Now, sadly, we can't always plane. Unfortunately, we can't always plane. But even when we're displacement sailing, we can use that smooth wash as our golden principle. By sitting and looking back, cool, what are the bubbles like? Oh, dearie me, don't fancy those. So nibble forward a bit, just lift the transom out of the water. Try and make the wash a nibble, trying to make the wake a little narrower. Is it smoother? Good. Is it not? Well, let's go a little bit further forward. So in order to check whether the boat is making the minimum amount of drag, we check whether the tiller is in the water, the tiller is in the center line and the wash is as smooth as possible. By the way, where is this likely, it's this heeling over and this sitting too far back and creating drag, where is this likely to be a problem? It's going to be a problem on the run. Actually, while we're on this photograph, we ought to just look at a couple of other things because we'll be raising them later on. Look at the front of the jib. Can you see how it's sagging in the wind? And look how beautiful the slot is between the back windward part of the jib and the leeward front of the mainsail. Can you see how parallel that is? So air going through that gap is squeezed at an equal amount all the way through the height of the sail. Absolutely spot on. And look at the twist of the main. Can you see that the top of the main is falling away relative to the bottom? And we're going to talk a lot about that and why we need to do that and how we can sort it out. Good. So in order to get all this sorted out, how are we going to do it? Well, first of all, we need to set the boat up right. So let's have a look at how we do that. Here we are, my dear little Heartland wayfarer in my front lawn, just before the weather went bad. A week later, there would have been 6 inches of snow here. Can you see what I'm doing is I'm just checking to see that the shrouds are in the same place so that the mast is dead upright. What we need to do is set the mast up so it's dead in the center. The jib's rolled up so we've got rig tension on. We're just checking the rig tension, 350 pounds, just as high as I can reach up on the weather shroud. And then what I'm now going to do is just to check the rake. But in order to check the rake, I've got to make sure that the top of the tape is in the same place. So I'm just going to check the back bands. Sorry about this, but it's in the old money. That's 19'3". And we check to the back of the transom, and you can see that it's 23'9", just as it's meant to be. What we've done is all well and good. What we've actually created is a boat that looks like a wayfarer. But as soon as we go on the water, whatever we've just done is going to change like mad. Why does it change? It changes for two reasons. First of all, when I crank on the kicking strap, can you see the mast start to bend? Right. If we pause there for a second, because we bent the mast like mad, you can see that it's bent so much that it's actually creased up. We've got luff staff creases in the mainsail, which we'd need to take out with the Cunningham. Because we've bent the mast, what have we done to the height of the jib halyard at the top there? We've lowered it down. So any good intentions to have 350 pounds on the windward shroud, now we're on the water, all of that's gone to pot. What will now happen is that 350 pounds will be much less. So on the bank in the setup without the mainsail up, the rig tension was 350 pounds. Now, what I'm going to do is crank on the kicker, lower the jib halyard, the top shroud, the top halyard sheave. Now I'm forcing the boom forwards into the mast, creating the mast. Now, unfortunately, we can't see it. I'm sorry about that. I apologize. You'll just have to take my word that the rig tension has gone down from 350 pounds to 280 pounds. Now, what's that going to do to the boat when we're trucking through the water? Well, it's going to do two things. First of all, the leeward shroud would be slack, but much more important, much more important, it's going to play havoc with the front of the jib. Get ready. Look what's happening to the front. Can you see the front of the jib is getting fuller? Just look at that. Wow. Right at the very front. Now, why is it doing this? It's doing this because we bent the mast. In what conditions are we likely to bend the mast more? When it's breezy. So what we're saying is that in a breeze with a merciless wind, a ruthless wind hurtling towards that poor little defenseless jib, it's going to make the front of the jib sag. The front of the jib sag, and as you can see beautifully from the photograph now, we created fullness right at the front. Right at the front means we can't point. The wind hitting us more from the side. If it hits us more from the side, that means more sitting out, helm sitting out. Well, I don't think so. So what are we going to do? As the wind changes, we are going to have to alter the rig tension to cope with the horror of jib luff tension. Look what's happened to the jib. Same jib, But this time, and you can see the bad weather coming, by the way, this time the same jib, instead of having jib luff sag caused by that merciless wind, just look how straight it is. This is your potential light weather jib. This would be a really hard sail to read in the light trickly stuff. Just look how straight the luff curves are. Sorry, the seam curves are. Ever so hard to read. So clearly what we've got to do then is sail with less tension in light winds so that we can create a little bit of fullness at the front of the jib, and more tension in a breeze when there's that, to avoid the full horror of jib luff sag. Right, so what we're going to do then is see what happens, first of all, in light winds, as the wind drops, that we want to create a bit of fullness at the front of the jib. What do? We let in most boats, like the Wayfarer, Hornet, Fireball, all of that lot, which do not allow the shrouds to be adjusted. The lucky old shroud boats that can adjust the shrouds, Albacore, Scorpion, Osprey, all those lucky old boats, they can do this sort of work on the shrouds rather than alter the rake that much like we're going to do by having to do it on the jib halyard. Because the angle of the jib goes into the mast at such a big angle at the top, it makes a much, much bigger difference to rake than the compression caused by the vertical load on the shrouds. So look what happens to the clew of the jib when we ease the shroud off in light winds in order to create a little bit of fullness so we can read it. Can you see that it dropped? By dropping, what's that going to do to the leech tension? It's going to maintain it, so we've in quite a dramatic difference. So we would have to move the car forward. Now look what happens to this time as the breeze gets up. So the clew drops in the jib in light winds. We're increasing the rake in light winds. This can't be right, but we've got to do it in order to get the jib right. Now look what happens to the boom. So as we tension the rig tension to cope with more wind so that the jib luff doesn't sag, what we're actually doing, if we do it on the jib halyard, is we're actually reducing the rake, which goes against all that's, perceived to be right. I mean, the usual thing is to increase the rake as the wind gets up. Now, in these sort of boats where you can't adjust the shrouds, how do you do it? Well, what you do is you do it before you go afloat. Here we've got the shroud in the middle position. Now, what we've done is we've set the boat up for middle condition. Now, what do I mean by middle conditions? By middle conditions, I mean the time, it's not very often, the moment in time when the crew is the perfect weight. A second or two ago, we saw the crew and the helm with the perfect weight. Now that same crew, perfect weight a second ago, as soon as the wind drops and he has to get in, he's going to be too damn heavy, isn't he? So what have we got to do in conditions where the crew is too heavy and sitting inside the boat is we have to reduce the rake. And what I do is I go up diagonally a notch. By doing that, I've reduced that distance from the masthead to the center of the transom by about 25 millimeters. Now, as the wind gets up, and this time I'm having to spill wind, what happens is this time the crew is too light because I'm having to spill. So now I want to organize the rake before going afloat. So let's go on to the next slide by going down a notch. So can you see I'm using a triangular system of the three holes. Middle position for middle conditions, go diagonally up for light conditions, and diagonally down for a breeze. If I went a vertical hole, a whole hole, in other words, I'd be increasing that masthead to transom measurement by 40 to 50 millimeters. By going down those little amounts, we're only going down a few mil, but it makes a massive difference. What it means now is that by going down that diagonal hole, I can now tension the jib halyard, keep the rake pretty much as it was, so that I'm not actually messing about with the height of the boom and the height of the jib clew. I don't know about you, but I always think you lose more in the light stuff by being over-kickered, over-tensioned than you do in the windy stuff by being under-tensioned. So I would always on, you know, having too little rake rather than too much rake. So the discussion before we go afloat. Dear old crew, are you going to be just right? Are you going to be too light? Or are you going to be too heavy? And that gives us so that we can then use the rig tension actually as our control of the jib luff sag. One thing I have forgotten to say is when you are afloat, how do you know how much rig tension you're actually using? How do you know whether it's just about right? And I look at the leeward shroud. If the leeward shroud is visibly slack, if it's wobbling all over the place, if the mast is clunking to leeward, then you will have too much jib luff sag. You will not be pointing. And in light winds, if there's no movement at all, I sometimes send my dear old crews down to leeward just to wobble the shroud, just to see whether it's moving an inch each side. Because if there's no movement at all, then the likelihood is the front of the jib is going to be too tight, too straight, too hard to read. So having set the boat up, having acknowledged that we're going to have to alter the rake according to the conditions, alter the rake and rig tension according to the conditions. Now let's just have a look, go from across the sail plan from front to back to see how we can make sure that the sails, remember we've only got 20% of our available time, make sure the sails are giving the maximum amount of squirt that they're capable of doing so. So let's deal with the angle of attack. What we're doing here is dealing with the front of the jib. Later on, we'll talk about the top of the main above the jib. The closer we can point to the wind, the closer we can get to the windward mark, quicker we can get to the windward mark, and the sooner that beating's over and the more, you know, the quicker we can get onto that lovely reaching stuff. If you can't point, if you're 5 degrees further off the wind than you should be, in every half a mile, you're sailing an extra 75 meters. You know, if you like your tummy hurting, by all means don't point. But I just want to point as high as possible. So how are we going to do that? I'm going to use the telltales. Unfortunately, because the boat's not moving, because it's static, the telltales here aren't working. But surely if we've got the angle of attack right, all 4, you know, quarter height, half height, and 3/4 height, all of those telltales will react at the same time. As soon as the boat's at walking pace, and remember the telltales will ape what is happening to the wind flow over the leading edge of the sail. They give us a second or two grace before the sail collapses. Once the boat's at walking pace, I don't know, 3 miles an hour, something like that, just nearly up to hull speed, the telltales will be angled up, should be angled up, need to be angled up at about 45 degrees. The reason they're angled up rather than horizontal is that think about the bow of the boat. As the boat moves through, that bow moves through the air, it's displacing the air, which pushes the air up and up and up and up. So there's a diagonal movement along the leading edge of the sail plan. And of course, the telltales are aping that. If all 3 windward telltales, sets of windward telltales, are all at the same angle, then the luff is at the correct, it's organized correctly. If the top telltale starts to alter, probably by doing its circle stalling before the bottom telltale, that means the leech is too slack. And so the leech has got to be tightened, as we'll see in a minute, either by tensioning the sheet or moving the fairlead back. On the other hand, if the bottom telltale goes before the top telltale, that means the leech is too tight, and so the leech has got to be easing the sheet or moving the fairlead back. Leeward telltales, remember, so the windward telltales are angled up, The leeward telltales don't have the luxury of all that air pouring over the windward side, so the leeward telltales will be horizontal. So the leeward telltales horizontal, the windward telltales angled up. The greater the difference between them, the closer to the wind you're pointing. Fast boats, your fireballs, you know, all of that lot, the telltales will be pretty much vertical, I would think, on the windward side, but they would still be horizontal on the leeward side. So remember the rule. If the top telltale goes first, the leech has got to be tightened slightly. If the bottom telltale goes first, the leech has got to be eased slightly. And we're talking fractions, as we'll see now. The leading edge is pretty much parallel throughout the height of the sail, and that's because the jib has been set up correctly. In order to get the angle of attack correct, I reckon that if you imagine the line from the fairlead, the sheet line from the fairlead through the clew, if you were to extend that upwards, it needs to meet the luff about, I don't know, 200 mil, 300 mil below the middle telltale. To be honest, I'm not actually that bothered. So long as it's just below the middle telltale, that's good enough for me, because that's your whole number. The decimal place movement, the nuances of movement, the critical movement now comes from moving the sheet in and out. Every unit, the sheet moves through the fairleads, the middle leech, just below that leech telltale in the area of the spreaders, the middle leech will move 5 times that amount. So an inch of movement through the sheet is 5 inches, a colossal amount. So we're not talking about giant amounts of movement. So once we've got the sheet angle about right, aiming just below the center of the foresail. And by the way, the wider the jib, like on a GP Wayfarer, the lower they can be, the narrower the jib, fireballs, Hornet, closer to the middle it's got to be. A sail, any sail, is at its most efficient when it's deflecting the air the least amount possible. So by easing the sheet, getting the top telltale just into line, makes the whole jib work that much better. Now let's actually have a look now and see what happens when we get it wrong. What we're now going to do is move it from, it looks quite good at the moment. Now what we're going to do is move it too far forwards and see the effect of that. Right, watch what I do. Here we go. Can you see how much I've tightened the slot? How can air get through that gap? Having it as tight as what we've just had it a second ago would actually be like putting a banana in your exhaust in your motor car. Now look what happens when I've eased it too much. Can you see by easing the sheet, what we've actually done is we've pushed the leeward front. We're controlling the back of the sail, and yet we've pushed the leeward front to leeward. We pushed it into a point where the wind can hit. This would be a terrible pointing jib. Just before the start of a race, you have to check whether you're pointing as high as you possibly can be. And what I always do is I luff up a little bit too far and I check to see what's happening, A, to the telltales, and B, what's happening to the back wind. If when I luff up, the top telltale circles and the top of the jib back winds, that means the leech is too slack and we're going to need to sheet it a little bit more, or just perhaps move the fairlead back a notch. Do you remember a second ago when we saw the jib luff sag? That's the product of fullness created by not having the rig tight enough. So this time, if you luff up on the whole of the jib back winds at the same time, what you've got to do is simply tighten the rig up. So if it back winds at the same time, tighten the rig. If the top goes before the bottom, control the leech of the jib by moving the fairlead forward a snippet or by sheeting in a snippet. And remember that 5-to-1 rule. And here it is from the back. I'm afraid a gust comes in a minute, which rather ruins things, but can you look at the telltale up there? That leech telltale is absolutely critical at getting the slot right. If air is jet proportioning off the jib, if air is going over both surfaces, windward and leeward correctly, air will be cascading off the back of that jib into the leeward side of the mainsail, making the mainsail that much more efficient. We need to control the leech of the jib. We need to sort out that telltale to make it stream as much as possible in order to make the slot, the gap between the windward back of the jib and the leeward front of the mainsail, as efficient as possible. This is the engine of the rig, where air pouring through that gap is squeezed through an ever narrowing gap. Because it's squeezed through this gap, it accentuates the pressure gradient between the windward side of the mainsail and the leeward side of the mainsail, making the front of the mainsail more efficient, right at the front, right where we want the drive, right where we want the squirt. So getting the slot right, and one of the big ways of doing it, is to get that telltale to work. Is it stalled? Has it gone around the leeward side? Has air stopped on the leeward side? Ease the sheet slightly. It doesn't need to be much. How much does it need to be? Just enough, just to get it to set. And remember the 5-to-1 rule. We spent a long time on the jib, which just shows how important crews are, but we're now going to do the mainsail. Right. How do we know that we've got the mainsail right? What do we look for when we're looking at the mainsail? Where to look? Do you remember we talked a minute or two ago about the angle of attack at the front of the jib being the leading edge of the sail plan? Well, think about the mainsail above the W. The top of the main above the jib actually is the first bit of wind, so first bit of the mainsail the wind hits. So it's got to be treated like a jib. It hasn't got the luxury of that accelerated air through the gap. That's why we need to set the top of the main with more twist. And how do we do it? I mean, we really are lucky. In fact, we are just so lucky, it's dead easy. How do we know how much tension to put on the leech of the mainsail in order to control the luff, just like we control the luff of the jib with the leech? All we need to do is just to ease the kicker, ease the main sheet until the sail backwinds in the W panel, in this case, just where the top of the jib is. This is the part of the mainsail, this is the area of the mainsail where the sail isn't quite sure what it is. I mean, below it, it's a mainsail because it's got a jib in front of it. Above it, it's a jib because it hasn't got a jib in front of it. So this is where I'm going to call it schizophrenic. This is the twitchy one. And I don't know about you, but I always find it hardest to get the telltale, the leech telltale on the main level with the top of the jib. It's the one hardest to get to work. All I'm going to do with my kicker tension and my main sheet tension is all I'm going to do is organize the load on the back bottom corner by controlling whether the mainsail is backwinding. Air's hitting the leeward side. And here's the rule. Is air hitting the leeward side? Sheet it in just a little bit. Tension just a little bit. And we'll see how to do that in a second. Is the sail not backwinding? Ease it, because remember that point, a sail is at its most efficient when it's deflecting the air the least amount possible. Because we're going to control the leech of the mainsail with the kicking strap and the main sheet, we've got to make sure that the mast bends according to what we want. If it overbends, we're going to have a sail too flat and lose power. If it is too stiff, we're going to have too much power, heel over and just go nowhere. Now, in the case of the Wayfarer, we have to use chocks, but it could easily be a mast ram. It could easily be a strut. It's exactly the same principle. So let's see what happens when on the case of the Wayfarer, I use the chocks. Right. Can you see there's a couple of marks on the actual side of the mast gate there? Those two marks are maximum bend and the mast straight. So I put a curved chock in, so I'm supporting the mast, and I'm now putting all the chocks to make the mast as straight as possible. So off we go, please. Yeah. Now what I've done is I'm fully chocked. This is the sort of mast bend I want. This is the sort of resistance to bend I want And you can see how much fuller the sail is. This is when Simon and I are the perfect weight. We're sitting out, he's sitting out, and I'm crouching behind him. Now, what happens when the wind gets up and Simon and I are too light? Mind you, it has to be pretty windy for that to happen. I learned a long time ago that if I have excessive mast bend, if the mast crumples, I'm going to find that the jib luff is going to be so saggy that it's just going to be horrible. So I've learned a long time ago that pretty much on all the boats, your Albs, my beautiful Hornet, certainly the Wayfarer, I don't allow more than 10 millimeters of a gap at deck level. That's 6-7 inches up the shrouds, more than enough to get rid of any fullness. So the way I set the mast up right is, do you remember in light wind, sorry, set the mast up. Do you remember in light winds when Simon and my crew is too heavy and he's sitting inside the boat? I do want a little bit of mast bend, because what I want is I want the tired, slow moving air to get round the leading edge of the sail plan. If it's full, if I've got a straight mast, there's going to be a right angle bend there. The air's not going to get there. And effectively, I'm reefing the front of the sail. So with Simon inside the boat, I don't have any chocks at all. The kicker is going to be slack. But what happens is the mast is going to be as bent as it can be in those conditions. As soon as it gets up, so that Simon's the right weight, I bung in all the chocks so the mast is stiff so that we can really go. Then there comes a time when I'm having to spill, so I go back to taking the 10 mm chocks out. So in light winds, have a gap so the mast can find its own position so the air can get over the leading edge of the sail plan. In middle conditions, nice and stiff. In a breeze, I have the mast bent at the front this time, if you think about it, so that because I'll be spilling wind, the boom can be further out. Because the mast is bending, it's making the sail wider. Because it's making the sail wider, it will be making it flatter. Because it's making it flatter, it's widening the gap between the back windward side of the jib and the leeward side of the front, making the slot wider so more air can pour through it without there being backwinding. So light weather, no chocks, or 10 mm gap, fully chocked in mid conditions, back to 10 mm gap in a breeze. And the equivalent, of course, with a mast ram and or the strut. So now let's have a look at the next slide. Let's see how we're going to achieve that downward load. Just a little bit of a gap. Now that's a real good judge for me to tweak with the boom closer to the center line, as I've just done there. I can do millimeters of movement to control the leech. How am I controlling the leech? What I'm looking at is the W panel at the front. Is it backwinding? Yes, then I need to bring the boom in. Is it not backwinding? Then I need to let the boom go further out. As soon as I go 150 millimeters away from the center line of the boat, the main sheet as a leech tension control becomes absolutely useless. And just look what happens to the leech. Can you see we're already losing the leech? Just look at the top, get ready for it. Are you ready for the gust? Wow. Yeah, lost all control. So as soon as the boom goes away from the center line, it has to be the job of the kicker. And this time, just as with the main sheet, how am I judging how much leech tension? I'm looking in the W panel. Is air hitting the leeward side? Yes, then I need to tension. Is air not hitting the leeward side? No, then I need to ease. The purpose of the bridle, I mean, it is an absolutely genius thing. Is what it's doing is it's raising the boat to the boom so that you can bring the boom into the center line without there being any leech tension. I mean, some boats, 400s and the like, they have the hoop in the middle. Merlins have the hoop in the middle. The Wayfarer has the bridle, Albacore has the bridle. And the beauty of it is because it's the diagonal angle to it, there is no downward load. So the boom can come into the center line without there being leech tension, so that you can have nuances of load to get that backwinding in the W panel organized. This time, look what happens to because the kicker's loaded, the boom's not going up into the air. So the boom can be opened or shut as a barn door in order, is the boat upright? Yes, then the boom can be in towards the center line. Is the boat starting to heel? Then the boom has got to go away from the center line. If you don't have enough kicker to organize it so the main in windy conditions is a barn door, you end up with the yo-yo situation. Because you haven't got enough downward load, the gust comes, the mainsail gets overloaded, the helm dumps the power, and then the boat comes upright too quickly, so he rapidly sheets in, and what happens, the boat heels over again. So you end up with sheeting in, and you have no idea how to control the boat. What we're after is, as the gust comes, the knee lifts up, the main sheet therefore unjams, the helm can just ease a snippet of main sheet, boom goes out slightly, reduces the curve so that the boat can weather the storm, and then as soon as the gust goes, the helm can bring the boom back in again. Can you see, I hope, that the kicking strap is the kicking strap is at an angle to both the boom and the mast. So there is a diagonal, there is a downward load, but because of the angle, the boom is forced forwards under the load of the kicker. And that's what causes the mast to bend. By forcing the boom forwards, the mast bends, the sail gets wide, because the mast bends, the sail gets wider and the sail gets flatter and reduces the backwind. And this is why the kicker must take control as soon as the boom goes away from the center line. How much kicker to use? Is it backwinding in the W panel? Yes, more kicker. Is it not backwinding in the W panel? Less kicker. Straightforward as that. It's our reason for being mainsail, sheet, and kicking strap tension. If we bend the mast like mad, look what happens to the mast can you see that the luff curve, the positive round, is being used up and it's starting to crinkle up? Well, that's unsightly. Doesn't look good. And this is where, in my boats, my sort of boats, you need to use the Cunningham. The Cunningham in other boats, your single-handers, your fully battened big boats and things, they need to be, it would be slightly different. But in my sort of boats, the Cunningham is a tidying up exercise after you've bent the mast to make to organize the kicker, to make the mainsail just on the point of backwinding in the W panel, or the albacore panel, or the Osprey insignia, or whatever. Right. Look what happens, however, if I overdo the Cunningham. Can you see, by overdoing it, I've created a ridge right behind the mast. How can the air possibly get round that? I mean, that's much better, isn't it? But look what I've done. Because I'm going over tensioning across the diagonal, but look also, as I ease it, what happens to the leech of the sail. I hope you saw that the leech slightly firmed up there and a telltale appeared. Over tensioning the Cunningham drags the flow forwards, eases the leech, and in my sort of boat, stops you pointing. If you can't point, the wind hits you more from the side, more heeling over, more sitting out. Now, the rule for me is mast bend on. As soon as the mast bend is organized, has the sail got wrinkles in it? Yes, then I can, especially if there's a cameraman about, I can just tension the luff just to get rid of those wrinkles. The rule definitely is, because we just saw how horrible it was a minute or two ago. We just saw how horrible it was a minute or two ago. If the kicker goes off, the Cunningham has to go off, otherwise you drag the flow forwards. Actually, while we're on this video, can we just look at telltales, because we didn't talk about telltales a minute ago. If the telltales are streaming, if they're jet propulsioning off the back edge, as one is just trying to do there, if the telltales are streaming, that means that the air is clinging from front to back to the sail plan. Air on the leeward side and the windward side is equal. You've got jet propulsion off the back. If the telltale stalls like they're doing now, then one side of the sail has broken down. The airflow on the leeward side has broken down. The telltale has gone round the leeward side. How do we sort it out? Easy. We just ease the kicker, ease the main sheet, open out the leech, weaken the support for the leech so that the back edge falls away slightly until the top edge, I try and get the top telltale to work. The schizophrenic one in the number panel, I don't know, I've given up with that one. The bottom one nearly always streams because of the jet propulsion through the slot. So it's the top telltale I try to get to work. But frankly, the back winding just at the top of the jib, which is our be all and end all for mainsail setting. And now we're going to talk about the clew out haul. Tensioning the clew out haul gives flatness to the bottom of the sail, but look what happens when we make the bottom of the sail full. By easing it in just a couple of inches, look at that slot, look at the gap. Now in light winds, that would be a terrible gap. The air couldn't get through, and in a breeze it would be awful because the boom would be further out. So look what happens when I tension the clew out haul. So you can see that by tensioning the clew out haul, we're not just flattening the foot, we're making a significant difference to the sail further up. And here's the rule. In light winds, crew inside, that tension, the foot needs to be as tight as possible because you want as big a gap as possible and you want to straighten out the leech so that the leech isn't hooked. In middle conditions, when the dear old crew's the perfect weight, then you could just nibble it in again, just half an inch or so. But as soon as the breeze is up, as soon as the boom goes away from the center line, as soon as you have to use the kicker to control the leech and the back winding, then you've got to tension the clew out haul because you don't want to close the slot. Remember, there's more air going to be going through that gap. If it were me, I would have it on the tight side as a general rule.
Firstly, that was a really comprehensive rundown of all of the rig tuning, sail setting stuff. And I know for some people it can feel a bit overwhelming. So what would you say was the first, you know, if you were coming back to sailing after maybe not doing so much last year and you wanted to really focus your efforts on one area of your rig setup, where would you put your time into and for what reason would that be?
Actually, that's a really good question. I do two things. I wouldn't be so bothered about mucking about with mast rake and all that lot. What I would be doing is looking at the leeward shroud. Is my leeward shroud moving? Then I need to tighten the rig. And if it meant the boom had to go up and the jib clew had to go up, tough. And the other thing I would be doing, and it's not just coming back, it's my reason for being, is I'd be looking at the mainsail in the insignia panel, just making sure that it was just and only just on the point of not backwinding.
Yeah, I think just having kind of a really good reference point for your boat. So if you always go back to that insignia panel, then whatever conditions you're sailing in, you've got that same reference point. So I think that's
absolutely
a great way to think about it. Right. No, that was great. Thank you so much. It was really informative, really interesting. I definitely really enjoyed it. A little bit of a different sail plan to some of the boats that I usually sail on, but yeah, took me back to where we all pretty much all learnt to sail on boats like that. So thank you.
And some of us still ending up there.
Yeah, the classics. No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for another great session. Next up on the Suzuki main stage, Kate Fortnum from the Green Blue will be talking to Saskia Sills from the British Sailing Team about protecting our boating playground and sustainable sailing for cleaner, healthier waters.